Hello everyone. My name is Nadine Palake, and welcome to Think Like Einstein Alumni Day 2020. The Think Like Einstein course is a program designed to help first year students develop critical thinking skills necessary to succeed in science-based college majors and careers. Unfortunately, this year, due to COVID-19, we will not have in-person class presentations. Instead, we will be interviewing our alumni. It is our third year hosting this event, and we are very excited for our guest today. Stacy Guzman is a third-year graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, completing her Ph.D. in biochemistry and molecular biophysics. She is a first-generation student and completed her bachelor's in science in biochemistry in May 2018 at CSUF. Before college, Stacy graduated from a continuation high school and never took science classes. She decided to enroll at her local community college and was offered the opportunity to research over the summer at Cal Poly Pomona and Cal State Fullerton. These experiences have allowed her to learn what research is and helped guide her towards a career path. She fell in love with the research and, through the STEM 2 program, transferred to CSUF. She then joined Dr. DeLiger and worked on the design and synthesis of drugs that can be used as anti-cancer therapeutics. Mentorship was the most important gift Stacy received during her time at CSUF. She balanced working a part-time retail job, commuting 2 hours per day, being a full-time student, and conducting research. Stacy was nominated to apply for the competitive and prestigious HHMI Exceptional Research Opportunities Program. She was then accepted to work with her matched distinguished professor, Dr. Stuart Schreiber at Harvard University. That summer, she worked on synthesizing 3D-like molecules. She was then invited back to Harvard the following summer and worked with a couple looking for a cure for the Prion disease. At CSUF, she became an LSAM, McNair, and HHMI scholar. She presented her research at several conferences and eventually brought home several first place. In her final year, she was a Sally Casanova CSU pre-doctoral scholar, which granted her the opportunity to work at MIT over her last summer. Now at UPenn, she is currently working on translational research. So now I'll hand it over to Stacy to share her presentation.
Thank you so much, Nadine. Thank you to Loida de Leon. I appreciate having this wonderful time to talk about my journey and share my experience over at Cal State Fullerton. So I'm very honored to be here and give you guys this overview. So I will have, okay, so my journey is obviously a little bit different. I didn't have a lot of experience knowing about college or university. So when I started off, I ended up at a community college and I received my degree in my associates in biological sciences. And then I transferred over to Cal State University Fullerton. And then I'm over now at the University of Pennsylvania. And I know a lot of people talk about, it's not a marathon, it's a journey. But to be completely honest with you guys, I always felt like I was completely behind of this race. Um, I was not, I didn't have the skill set that would help me in college. And I had to really start from the bottom and learn how to work my way up. And one of the biggest ways that I was able to do this was learning about research when I was over at Citrus Community College. And this was thanks to Dr. Marianne Smith, who became my mentor there and was able to provide me with the resources to learn more about research and conduct summer research. So a lot of the summer research for undergraduates was amazing because I learned that it was a paid experience. You were going to gain experience, learn how to critically think, and gain wonderful mentors and connections. And a big part of them of my experience was learning about algae that would be converted into biofuel. So I thought that was really amazing and interesting that you could turn this small molecule into something that could eventually be used as biodiesel. So I thought that was amazing. And of course, research comes with learning more about how how you can build community with it. You're always searching, analyzing with others, and making a lot of connections. So I thought research was the area that I really wanted to go into. And eventually I ended up transferring to Cal State Fullerton with the STEM Squared program. And when I initially arrived, I was a biology major, and then I switched over to biochemistry. And a major component for this was my love for organic chemistry. I know that a lot of people are always scared of organic chemistry, but for me, I took it as a new experience, and it was like learning a new language, and I loved it. And I eventually found my research mentor, who is Dr. Deliger, part of the biochemistry department. And he was wonderful. He allowed me to work in his lab and really take me under his wing. And there I was creating drugs that could potentially be used to cure cancer. This is developing small molecules. What was interesting about this project was we were working with niclosamide, which is initially used as a tapeworm infection inhibitor. And we were able to basically use the small sides and add in different portions that would create a new drug library. And a lot of these drugs were able to inhibit cancer cells. So we thought that was very interesting. And I had a lot of fun working in that lab. And because of the research that I was doing, I ended up working in a REU where I had to go through a nomination process through HHMI, thanks to Dr. Linder. And I went into the XROP program. And once I was selected, I got matched with Dr. Stuart Schreiber, and he's over at Harvard at the Broad Institute of Harvard and MIT. And here I was working with developing novel bicyclic triazolodiazepanes. And basically, these are 3D molecules. And it took a very long process, but Sean Nelson, who at that time was my mentor, working with me, he really helped me out as well, and taught me a lot about my presentation skills and developing these very complex molecules. And if you can think of, I have this little image here. A lot of the molecules that are out in the market, they tend to be 2D, they're flat molecules, but we were interested in looking at 3D molecules where they had a lot more complexity to them, and they were able to go into different binding pockets of proteins that would eventually even either target a particular protein or prevent something else. So I thought that was something that I would eventually want to do and continue on with. And I made a lot of great friends when I was out in Boston, and it was a really great experience getting out, of course, of California. That was my first time, and learning how to become independent, living on my own, and gaining new mentors and experiences. I was eventually invited back for the next REU, and this time I was working on the Prion protein. And my experiment here was to work with Dr. Sonia Valeb and Dr. Eric Minical. They are a couple, and what was interesting about them was that Sonia's mother passed away from prion disease, and prions are basically misfolded proteins. So in our DNA, it typically goes from DNA to RNA to protein, and there's some kind of weird misstep that occurs from a normal protein that eventually goes into the misfolded form and can eventually cause cell death. And as you can see on the left here, we have a section of a normal brain, and on the right is what usually will occur with prion disease. There are small gaps that start occurring in the brain and will eventually have some kind of sponge form and lead to cell death, or excuse me, lead to death. And so Sonia was tested because this is genetic, and she tested positive for the mutation, and they decided to go and work together as graduate students and leave behind their careers and start working as graduate students to find a cure for her disease. And I was also able to publish a research article with them during that summer that I worked with them. And I will say a big component that helped me out with my research and moving forward was working with a lot of the research scholar programs that are offered at Cal State Fullerton. I started off with LSAMP when I initially transferred, and then I was able to work with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute with HMI Research Scholar Program with Dr. Linder, who was such an amazing mentor for me. And I also worked with the program in McNair with Dr. Letirte, and as well as the Sally Casanova CSU Predoctoral Scholars Program. And I highly advise all of you to look into different programs that will help you build community, help you learn more about what research is if you are interested in this, or even if you're not, it's just a way to help you become more independent in how you're writing. Because I had to go through several workshops with these programs and helping me become a lot more confident in my abilities. Um, so I was able to uh, then go into different conferences and go into research competitions. And this is not to brag or anything, because a lot of this, I had stage fright when I initially started. I didn't know how to present. I had just my abilities to present were not at their best. And thanks to these programs, I was able to refine them and find ways to become better and overcome that fear, which is something that I highly suggest for all of you. If presenting is something that you're scared of or you're worried about, I had those same fears, but it's not until you get out there and really put yourself out there that will eventually help you out. And now that I'm over as a graduate student at UPenn, what does this look like? I am a paid full-time researcher. I initially did about 2 years of graduate level courses and then 1 year of my lab rotations. And now I was able to complete this preliminary thesis defense that you do on your second year to move forward as a PhD student. And now I eventually found my dream lab working with Dr. Fagenbaum, and I went back to my love of rare diseases. So Dr. Fagenbaum, he wrote a book about it. It's Chasing My Cure. And he, during his first year in medical school, he was a very healthy individual. And unfortunately, he had this strange cytokine, what they call cytokine storm occurring, and his body began to deteriorate, and he eventually looked like this. And they weren't sure what he had, and they eventually found out that this was due to some rare disease called Castleman disease, where a normal lymph node looks like this, and with Castleman disease, it creates this strange circular motion here with your cells, and it causes flu-like symptoms, liver dysfunction, kidney dysfunction, bone marrow dysfunction, and is because your body is basically attacking itself. And he decided to find some kind of cure for himself, and he was able to do that. He is living at the moment very normally, but it's a very terrible disease. A lot of people have passed away because of it, and he was able to fight it 5 times, and he continues to fight for this cure. And it's not, we don't know if it's permanent or not. And as far as we know, he's doing well, but the whole idea is to continue to look into what causes this, because the cause is completely unknown. There are so many different links. And so I was interested in his story, and decided to reach out to him. And now I get to work with him, which I feel very fortunate working with him. And this is now for my thesis work, where I am basically doing what is called multiomic profiling for the immune response for Castleman disease. And like I mentioned before, within Castleman disease, there's these strange cells that start accumulate into a circle. And my whole goal is to learn what the etiology is, what kind of cell types there are, if there are certain signaling pathways that are affecting Castleman disease or cytokines, and eventually hoping to find some kind of treatment. And there are so many unknowns within Castleman disease on its own that um, I find other people may find incredibly challenging because you have too many darts that you're throwing and you really don't really know what you're going to get. But that's something that I love about research, and especially within the rare disease community and how passionate they are. And so my whole goal right now is to find a cure for Castleman disease. With multiomics, I like to think of it as before with single omics, you would look at different portions of either the cell, or here's an elephant, but everyone has sort of a different idea of what it may be if you're looking at different sections of it. But with multiomics, you get to look at everything as a whole. So now I have switched over from the wet lab to the dry lab, and I am learning how to code. And it has obviously been a whole new transition for me. I went from synthesizing molecules to working with mice and going over to running various assays, and all my research has been wet lab, but now I moved into the dry lab. And it's been great, especially during these times. And for the future and beyond, my goal, of course, is to complete my PhD. I believe I have at least 3 more years. And I will continue to work with Dr. Feigenbaum. He has built this Castleman disease collaborative network, and that is another part of what I love about this lab, that I get to work with other individuals. Oh, excuse me about that. Sorry, it paused a little bit. I had something pop up. But working with other individuals that are like-minded, that have a similar goal, and that is to continue to find cures for Castleman disease patients. And my goal at the end of this is to open up a clinic or a foundation that will be completely rare disease or cancer focused. And this is within underserved communities. I want to be someone that can be propelling over the research for individuals that are not very well connected or familiar with doctors or researchers all over the world. And I want to be able to help out with that. And I will finish off by saying, with a doctoral degree, it is incredibly flexible. There are many different avenues that you can go into. Many, for example, go into getting a postdoctoral degree, and this is after the PhD. And a lot of times these are for people that want to go into academia, or you can go into science/medical communications. There's intellectual property, engineer focused roles. So they're consulting. So there are many, many different other areas that you can go into with your doctoral degree. And I just wanted to finish this off by saying you will have so many different loops and holes, and you may feel like your road to success will look like this, but it actually is incredibly windy and knotted, and you're going to go back and forth and not really know what you're doing. And that is completely fine if you, even at this moment, don't know what you want to do, because I felt like that many times, and I always questioned it, but continue pushing forward and continue to find ways to become motivated and understand that this is a journey for yourself and only for yourself. And I am very happy to answer any questions that Nadine will be asking me. And if you have any other questions, you can always feel free to contact me as well. Thank you.
It was a wonderful presentation. I feel like I got to learn a lot listening to it. Um, so, starting off with the questions, as a first generation student, what motivated you to continue pursuing a higher education?
Right. For me, it was because of the fact that I was first generation. I knew that my parents worked incredibly hard to just get me forward in where I needed to be. Of course, they had no idea what I'm doing right now, but I think that was a huge motivator for me, just knowing how much they have sacrificed and knowing that I can also be the first in my family to pursue something that I either have never really seen people that look like me in an area like that, or that I can eventually become that first person within my family to do that and motivate others.
So what encouraged you to pursue like this? I know you talked about it a little bit in your presentation, but what really like sold you into this career path?
For me was obviously my love for the sciences, and I think that I found it more as a challenge. I felt that a lot of it was finding the piece to the puzzle, and it, even though it is very complicated, and I know that research may not be for everyone, I always found myself completely immersed in my research when I was working with Dr. Deliger, and I I don't know. I felt like it was completely different outside of the your typical classes. For when you're in class, for example, you're learning or you're reading a textbook, but a lot of the science that or all the science that you're reading from a textbook came from research. And I wanted to be a part of some area that will be completely new within research that has never been seen before, and I wanted to put my own piece in that completely complex puzzle as well.
So I know in your presentation, like you had a little picture of the people like running, and you
Mhm.
always felt like, or you said that you felt like you were behind. And with myself, I feel like I didn't start getting into the opportunities at Cal State Fullerton early enough. Like I wish I got into them earlier. So how did you overcome that feeling of like, oh, I'm behind, like everyone else is like, you know, way more knowledgeable than me or like they're way more into everything I want to be into and I'm like you know
Yeah.
behind in that sense.
I actually feel that way still. There are many people that will, there will always be someone that is either smarter than you and will know more than you. But what I have learned from that was it's not because it makes them smarter, like in a way that you can't be smart enough. It's because either they were able to gain that opportunity a little bit earlier than you, and you can catch up by either reading more about that particular subject that you feel that you're weaker at, or that you feel like you are not going to eventually reach. There is a point where you can sort of sit down a little bit and look at the broader picture and think, okay, where am I lacking, or where can I improve? And there will always be room for improvement. So that's something that I really had to work at and tell myself, okay, if I don't understand this particular area in my research, what can I do to get better at that? And it was obviously having to read more about it. And I would say for you, even if you don't feel like you're doing enough, or the time is sort of going out and you haven't really taken advantage of all the opportunities that are available to you, make a list about it and say, what can I go into, or what programs am I interested in helping at? And if you have to take a little bit more time to do that and pursue that, I would encourage that, because experience will always be incredibly helpful in no matter what experience you're trying to go into.
So while you were in your undergrad, did you ever consider changing your major at any point, or was there ever a time where you're like, you know what, maybe science isn't for me, or any thoughts like that?
Yeah, no, I there is always a lot of this self-doubt about that. I think for me was I was a biology major, and you start looking at all the courses that you have to take, and it could become very overwhelming. And you start to if you have one class that maybe doesn't feel like you did really well in, and you think to yourself, well, maybe I'm not going to do well in this other class, or whatever it may be. And biology was not my strong point. It was mostly chemistry. I was really, really good with chemistry, and that was the reason I ended up switching over to biochemistry. Because I felt that the list of the biology classes that were on there, that I wouldn't do so well. And that was far from what it was the truth. It was more myself just doubting myself and not really picking up what I could do to become better in that particular area that maybe I felt like I was lacking again. And I think that is important for you to also figure out what are certain classes that you may like or may not like. Even though I wasn't the best within biology, I knew that with biochemistry, I would be able to take QChem and PChem, and without having switched over, maybe I would have never taken those before, but I sort of knew in the back of my head that these were other classes that were being offered within this degree. So that's what helped me want to switch out. So I would say think about the classes that you are taking. If within your degree, if you start feeling with a few classes that it may not be for you, it is completely fine to switch over. It doesn't mean that you're going to be terrible at those particular classes. It just means that maybe your interest level is not at the best with those classes, but you may find something else that will completely change your viewpoint about it, and either stick with it or want to change into a different area.
So with times like we're in today, how do you keep yourself motivated to continue learning and researching, especially when everything's so like restrictive?
Yeah, it's been very hard, and I know that I have fallen a lot before into a slump, and even now, I have my days, and these times are really weird, and I completely understand that. I'm very used to going into the research lab, and that was sort of how I would go. I would wake up, go to the lab, and I would come back around 8 p.m. And that's not the case anymore. I'm obviously doing all my research on my computer, but I would say building up a schedule for yourself, having some kind of appointment calendar. I make sure that I treat it as a job, and ensuring that I have a checklist. I'm very much of a checklist person. So I like to write it down and check it right off, and that makes me feel really good. And I would say for anyone, if you're struggling with that, start small. You want to start off with not with things that are manageable for you, even if it means 5 minutes of reading the research article for me. And then eventually those 5 minutes will turn into an hour or 2 hours for me. And just continuing to remind myself that I am doing this for my future, for my career. And there are a lot of books out there as well that can be helpful. So I would suggest finding ways that can motivate you through that, and finding peers as well that can help you motivate you as well.
So along with that, I know that people are stuck in their houses or apartments, sitting in one place, and they feel like because they're stuck at home, they, need to be working all the time. They're not doing anything. They're just sitting around. They need to work, work, and work. How do you balance doing like school and work stuff and then still like having time for yourself?
Yeah. I so I think a big part of it is I do the Pomodoro method. And that is something that I highly suggest for people if you start feeling a little bit overwhelmed with the work life area, where you can set up a timer of either 30 minutes, and you're only focused for those 30 minutes, and you do not get up from there, and continue to do that, and treating it as a work schedule. But you have to have time for yourself as well. There are moments where I am reading and I start to sort of get out of that zone, and I want to either pick up my phone or watch something else, and continue to do that. But you have to find time for yourself regardless of how busy your schedule will be. I like to go on walks. Like I walk around. I Getting exercise is incredibly important. I mean, I'm sitting the whole time, so I try to go for a walk. I try to go for a run, and having maybe a buddy system would be helpful as well. Keep having someone that will hold you accountable for what you're doing. And I mean, I have more of like a creative side with my fun time as well. So I like to paint. I love to draw. I've been knitting very much grandma style with things, but I mean, it's you have to make the most of this time, and I definitely try to do that.
No, I feel that. I try to get a little crafty as well. So do you have any advice for someone who's trying to look for that mentorship type of relationship with someone? How does one get offered a mentorship?
Yeah, I would say getting offered it is not the best way to look for it. You really have to actively find a mentor and really put yourself out there. And even during these times, this is an area like a time when you can send out an email and try to schedule some kind of either Zoom meeting with someone else and just talk it out. For me, I that's what I would do. I would schedule up an appointment and talk to whoever I was going to meet with and ask them questions. And I would make either an outline of what I wanted to talk with that particular professor and tell them, I'm interested in this. Do you have any advice for me? And to be honest, everyone at Cal State Fullerton, they're incredibly helpful. They are willing to share their own experience with you, and they become your connections. They are people that will continue to help you out. And just because it may not feel the best with one particular person doesn't mean it won't for with another. So I would say continue to reach out, and even asking someone, that one professor that you feel very comfortable with, continue to reach out and ask them, do you know of another professor that would also be willing to maybe mentor me? And they can find someone else that could have like a similar area that you're interested in as well. So I would say reach out. Don't be shy about it. Sending out that initial email is probably the worst part, because you're obviously scared of what they may say about you. But at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. It's you are trying to build yourself up. You are there to improve yourself. And if someone isn't willing to help you, then that's not the right mentor for you. And they're not there to help you with that particular thing that you may want. But there are a lot of people that want to see you become successful.
That was some great advice. I really felt that because sometimes I get scared to reach out to professors and things like that. So what was the biggest hurdle getting into grad school for you?
Uh, the biggest hurdle was, of course, feeling that it is the right move for you, and it takes a long time. I wrote out my personal statement for about 2 years, and I kept editing it and editing it. And the application process could be grueling, and it's very, very long. I had to take the GRE, which I didn't do well in, and that was very hard for me to get past. I Obviously, with standardized tests, there are certain individuals that may do better than you, and the preparation for that will be different for everyone. And because I never really took standardized tests. That was probably the one part that really hit my application the most. And I felt that I wasn't good enough, obviously, for the graduate programs that I was applying to. But these days, many universities have actually removed the GRE because they know that it doesn't say anything about you as a person, and rather it's your research and your letters that will make the difference. So, but initially, because I did believe that the GRE was a big component of my application, it could really drain you down, these standardized tests. And I will say though, like you have to sort of get over it at some point and continue pushing forward. And that was one part of myself where my PI, even Dr. Deliger, had told me, you just have to keep pushing. You can't keep thinking or letting that bring you down and not let you apply just for one tiny part of your application. They're going to look at it holistically, and that's what eventually happened.
Right. So continuing, how did you figure out that you wanted to pursue a PhD and not a master's in science?
Yeah, so for me, it was kind of an easy option, and it was only because I knew that I was able to see other PhD students. So at Cal State Fullerton, you're mostly surrounded by master students. So that was sort of my reach before. And when I had my research experience and I was able to meet students that were PhD and completing that and even further along that path of postdoc, I thought, okay, well, what are the major differences? And the truth is, you do get paid as a PhD student. That was a big component for myself. I wanted to ensure that I would at least have something that would be paying me to do the research, and mostly because I was passionate about it. But the other aspect too was I knew that I would gain a lot more experience out of it as well. And of course, the PhD is at a higher level from the master. So I knew that eventually I would want to get my PhD, but if I can transition and go from undergrad to the PhD, why not? I already knew that the research component was something that I was really, really looking forward to. And even as a doctoral student, you have to ensure that becomes the number one part of it, because your whole life revolves around the research. So that's what helped me out, knowing that I would get paid, that it would lead on, even adding a few more years from the masters, that would be like 3 more years. I didn't mind that because I knew that I would end up with a higher degree as well.
It's really interesting. So do you have any specific tips about someone who's thinking about getting into research but doesn't know how to, get the ball rolling?
Absolutely. Reaching out and going in, and again, you got to do the research. You have to like I did. I went into Cal State Fullerton and I googled research scholar programs, and I looked at the research scholar programs that were available, and I reached out to the people that were directing those particular research scholar programs. You want to look at the deadlines. And the big part I'm saying this is because many of these programs actually do pay you to do the research. I spent about a whole year doing research without getting paid. And uh, obviously, that is something that you will initially do. But if you could get a little bit of money for it and for the work that you're putting and the time in, then that's great. But reaching out and going into the website for Cal State Fullerton in your particular area in NSM, and looking at the professors and what they're doing for research. Read a little bit about what they do. You don't have to go too crazy extensive into it, but just read a little bit about it. And if there are a few people that you're interested in, email them and tell them, I want to meet with you to talk with you. And once you eventually have that meeting, and not just with one professor, but try to pick at least three of them and talk to them and ask them, what are your students do in your lab? What kind of project could I get involved in? And what kind of PI are you? Are you actually involved with your students? And I want to eventually go into a PhD or a master's or whatever it may be. And how could you help me reach that goal? Because remember, like, even though you're putting in the time, that time is valuable, and you want to ensure that whoever you're working under will help you become successful as well, and you're not putting in time and you're not going to get anything out of it either. It doesn't make sense. So you want to make sure that people that you're going to work with will value your time.
So I know you mentioned earlier that you transitioned from doing wet lab stuff and then now you're working more dry lab. Do you prefer one over the other?
Oh geez. At this moment, I do prefer the dry lab component. And the only reason I say that is because I have done a lot of wet lab for quite some time, and it is something completely new to me. I never thought about coding. I never thought about doing some kind of computer science thing. And it is a new area for me, which I find really, really interesting. And I like the idea that I can take the work with me anywhere I go, and it's very, very flexible in that way. But I do miss the wet lab though, because I was able to run the experiments myself, and it's there's something different about being at the bench and just working around and seeing your assay completed and getting into the lab. It's just a whole different experience than just being at home the whole time. So maybe it'll change in a year, and I won't be very happy doing the dry lab, but I highly doubt it though. It's been very, very fun for me, and you do see data right in front of your eyes happening. So I for these times, I will say dry lab is the way to go. And maybe if some of you want to find a dry lab that can uh, help you code, and because who knows how long this COVID situation will happen, in the meantime, to get that experience. Because again, I was wet lab and I didn't know anything about coding, so there are many different resources out there that are free and that can teach you a little bit about coding. And if you like it, then I would say try it out. And if you don't, then hopefully by the things go back in time, you will go back into the wet lab.
So what essential skills do you think you have to develop early on in college life to you know, be successful, and what skills have stayed most relevant in your life?
Definitely finding ways to balance out your life and scheduling. Becoming very disciplined with your time is so, so essential. I would wake up early morning and I had to commute. So I had to learn what time the parking lot would not be as full. And I would make sure that I would get there early on and get into the lab and do X amount of hours. But scheduling your time is super, super important. Making sure that you're actually following that. And I would say even scheduling your study time and making it like a job where you're only focused from 3 to 6 studying, and then you have your time to eat dinner, and then you go back to studying again, and revolving around that. Making sure that uh, you stay organized, of course, and reaching out to get the help that you need. I would say taking advantage of all the resources that you have at Cal State Fullerton as well helped me become very successful. Anytime that you run into a problem with whatever you may be dealing with in your homework or just in life, there will always be some kind of solution for you out there to pick up those pieces.
And then just going back to just lab stuff and research, there's I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about lab. Like when they think about scientists or people who do research, they're just stuck in one room, like just doing little experiments all day, like you see on TV. So for do you have any like fun stories or like any like fun things to share about research that maybe one wouldn't know if they weren't into research like that or science?
Yeah, research is very fun on its own, and there is a lot of collaboration involved. The great part with Cal State Fullerton, I'm trying to think of a fun time. Well, there were many, because you're not alone in the lab. You have other members going into the lab, and you start to build new friendships and relationships with people. And I had a lot of fun with my friend Steve, who was over in the Han lab, and he was a huge jokester, and he would come out of the lab, and we would all sort of the different labs that were close to each other, we would all come together and either play a game of I don't know if you've heard of it, coup. It's
Yeah,
a card game.
I've played, yeah.
So we would during our lunchtime or our free time, we would either all get together and play that. He always was a huge prankster, so I was always watching him create some kind of new prank involved with that. And we would put music in the lab and just sort of dance around and be goofy. um I don't want to say anything else than that, and we'll keep it there. But you will. I'm thinking like the really fun times. We've had some weird experiments that we would create in the labs as well, just for fun. Some of them, they're all safe, so that's where I will keep it.
That's
But I will say, if you will make the most out of it the way you want, you can be that person that will go in the lab and just quickly do your research and get out of there, or you can make the most out of it and go and have lunch together, go get boba. I don't know, play a card game together. I actually, we in the front of the lab, we made a whole fireplace thing out of like cardboard, and we would decorate around the labs, and that would become like the whole exciting portion of it as well. So again, you make the most out of what you can with what you have.
that's fun. Yeah, I've played too. It can get like super intense sometimes. Um,
Yeah, so you're
but
not always
yeah,
cooped up in there.
right. Do you have any last words of advice for our students, just general things you'd like to share?
Yeah, take advantage of all your resources, and I mean that. I would go to all the SI sessions that were available. I That is such a wonderful tool that you will have there. You are surrounded by other students that are also as lost as you are. I know, I understand that going to the lecture can become overwhelming, and you will not learn from that single lecture. And don't ever feel like anyone else is going to learn from that particular lecture. You really have to put in the work. And all of that work comes from outside resources. So going into office hours, there, that you should take advantage of, because again, you're building mentorship with with that person, with that professor. You're building connections with that professor. There are other students that will go into office hours and have similar questions that you may have. You can even ask, if you're not completely comfortable with having other people around there, you can ask the professor, can you meet with me at X amount at whatever time? Because, I don't feel very comfortable asking this question, or you may feel like you're dumb about it, but you're not. It's no question is ever dumb or anything like that. We all have questions. Um, I went to tutoring for math, the writing center. I went to the career center where they looked at my CV a million times over, and not to brag, but I have a very nice CV because of them. And that wasn't my doing; it was them helping me out, or else I had no idea how to create a CV. And these are problems that like you want to ask your professor about, but sometimes they're so busy as well working with other things that you can get help from other places as well. And that for me was the Career Center. And I also went there for my interview process. I told them that I was going to go into graduate uh, interviews, and they were able to sort of create my own interview and help me with that. So take advantage of every resource available for you on campus, because I will tell you, time goes by super fast. And if you do not take advantage of every day that you have there, time will go by, and then you're at the end, you're going to be like, oh no, I didn't do this or I didn't do that. So think about it, make that list. Like I said, make the list, keep checking it off. And if even if they are big goals, break them into smaller goals, and you will become successful if you continue to follow through with your what you say.
Well, that was some awesome advice. I feel like I've learned a lot from talking with you today. And since that was our last question, I would just like to say thank you, Stacy, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to meet with me today and share your experience at CSUF and postgrad. We appreciate all of your wisdom and all of your advice. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for having me again. I am very happy to be here, and I wish you all the success that you can get as well out of Cal State Fullerton and beyond.
Thank you.